Time permitting, we will ask questions submitted through Facebook and then also conduct a short lightning round. Bob Coe of Isthmus will keep track of time and warn candidates with signs when there is 1 minute left, 30 seconds to go, and when the time is up. We will start with opening statements.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. And thank all of you for coming, and I hope to provide you with some information. My name is Bob Jambois. I'm presently a major felony crimes prosecutor in the Dane County DA's office. I've been doing that for the past little over a year now. And what I've learned in that position, in that capacity, is that the Dane County District Attorney's office is truly a hot mess. It is a demoralized, dysfunctional, disorganized office, and I laid that at the shoulders of Ishmael Ozanne, who has been an absentee landlord. He has been an empty suit in the position of district attorney. It's a person, he seems to like the title, he just doesn't like to do the job. Now, I've been a prosecutor for most of my adult life. I started out in Kenosha as an assistant city attorney, and then I was the Kenosha County District Attorney for 9 terms. When I started as the Kenosha DA's office, that also was a demoralized, dysfunctional, disorganized mess, and I transformed that office. I turned it around during the time that I was there. I instituted many, many reforms. I developed a sensitive crimes prosecution unit and trained law enforcement in sensitive crimes techniques. I trained law enforcement also in domestic violence investigation techniques and prosecution techniques. So I transformed that office, and this office is in desperate need of that kind of transformation. Now, you might think that these are my words and my words only, but that's not true. Other attorneys that have left that office have described it as a rudderless, leaderless ship of chaos. And that prosecutor who said that was a very experienced administrative prosecutor, and she was actually quoting what one of the judges in this county had said about the Dane County DA's office. 20 out of 28 prosecutors have quit that office in the last 2 years, and that is further reflection of the absence of leadership. Ishmael Ozanne is a terrible leader, and he's also a bully. He's a bully and abusive to the people that work in his office, and that's the reason that I decided finally to stand up for the victims in this community, which I've been doing in court and which he hasn't been doing. So I think that we need a prosecutor who does things. He described me as I'm a throwback or something. Well, I guess I am kind of a throwback. I believe you're supposed to earn your paycheck. And the way that a prosecutor earns your paycheck is by going to court and standing up for victims of crime, by trying cases and knowing how to win them, by administering an office and mentoring the younger prosecutors in our office. And there's a lot of younger attorneys in our office because so many people have left. I support alternatives to prosecution. I support all kinds of things, including a veterans court. And Mr. Ozanne indicates the veterans court is one of his achievements. But the fact is he opposed the veterans court. He said we didn't have the resources. And after we finally got one over his objection, then he pulled the plug on it and said he wasn't going to send people to it. He said we didn't have the resources. Well, we would have the resources if Ishmael Ozanne would get up off his butt and go to court, which is what everybody else in that office is supposed to do, and that's what he should do as well. Veterans stood up for us. We should stand up for them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Ozanne?
Thank you. Well, I'm not the first African-American leader to be called lazy, incompetent, and not showing up for work. That actually really hurts because I take this job very seriously. I do it 365 days a year, 24/7 for the time of my term. Now, I don't believe my opponent expected me to release 397 pages of my calendar going back to 2010, day one of my time in office, with card swipes that show that I have rarely been out of the office for, say, a vacation. Okay? I am there working every day in and out of the office to make sure that there is systemic change in this community and in this criminal justice system. I took office in 2010 as the first African-American district attorney with a tale of two cities. Basically, we're one of the top 10 places to live in this nation consistently and one of the top 10 places to retire. Yet, we have the worst racial disparities in the nation, and we're also the worst place for children of color to succeed. That's what I took office with. And I have pushed hard these 6 years to ensure that we have had systemic change in this community. There are programs in existence today that are working, taking on racial disparities on the front end, face to face, and moving us forward in this community. The Community Restorative Court did not exist 2 years ago. Our no-hit zone did not exist 2 years ago. It's been in existence for 2 years. We have not had an incident within our public spaces in the office. We are getting national attention. We haven't had an incident where children were hurt, where there was abuse. This is going to make us national leaders. We have a child abuse initiative in our office, which is also getting national attention. These are things that are taking us forward. Now, if I came to you and told you that I was going to take us back 10 years, you'd laugh me out of town. But that's the promise of my opponent. Not just to take us back, but to take us back to Kenosha in 2005. Now today, we are a community of 500,000 plus. Kenosha is still 167,000. The comparison is not apples to apples. And on top of that, we also have the state capital within our jurisdiction. So the prosecutor's role, which is dual, to deal with crime on the street and public safety, as well as government overreach, is very important in this community, especially because the head of state government sits here. I have been tested. I have come out solid on the side of labor, on the side of the citizens, with the open meetings law litigation that went straight to the Supreme Court and was the longest oral argument, along with litigation that now sits with our highest court in the nation, and we will soon find out if they are going to hear it. But those are things that I have done. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill?
Ozanne, you've accused your opponent of playing to implicit bias and explicit racism and how he's framed issues in this campaign. Explain what you mean by that. And while you're at it, tell us why it matters that you are the first African-American district attorney in Wisconsin.
Well, why does it matter? It matters because that was a baseless, reckless attack that he knew he didn't have facts to base it on. He hadn't even requested the information that you see here in the 397 pages. Okay? That right there is an issue that was based on implicit bias and explicit racism. Because I'm not the first African American leader to be called lazy and shiftless, is basically what he did, and that's a paraphrase. Now, I'll take his word that he would have done the same thing and called the same lie if I was a white person. But it's especially egregious because of what he has put up as a defense. Now, I take it very seriously, and that's why I released my calendar all the way back to 2010. I shouldn't have had to, but I'm a public servant, and therefore I put the evidence out, and it's on our website. People can click on it and look for themselves. I hope they don't print it because I don't want them killing a whole bunch of trees, but it's there. Now, what is the significance of me being the first African American district attorney? Well, you tell me what the significance is in the community that's worst in the nation for racial disparities, in the community that's worst in the nation for opportunities for children of color to succeed. The things that I am doing, the lens at which I approach problems, and the lens which I have approached pushing change in this criminal justice system is precisely that. In 6 years, I have made more change in this criminal justice system in this community than's been done in the last 20 years.
Well, you get to respond for...
Well, of course, it's patently offensive to suggest for even a moment that anything I've said is racially motivated or racially based. The language that he uses is his words that he applied to me and then accused me of being a racist for using the words that he supplied. So I've never referred to him in that fashion. What I've said is he doesn't show up in court. He doesn't go to court. He doesn't litigate. He doesn't administer the office. And I'm not the first person to make observations regarding this. Assistant District Attorney Shelley Rush, who worked in that office, she also worked for me for 17 years, but she worked for him for 5 years. She writes in her letter, by the time I left the office, I calculated that if I had a nickel for every time someone asked me, what does Ish do, I could be retired by now. And I've worked in that office for the past year and a half. He doesn't do any cases. He doesn't do any jury trials. He doesn't assist. He doesn't mentor any of the other attorneys in the office. And he doesn't manage or administer the office. And he's got 367 pages. Look at some of those pages. For example, March 23rd, he's got a judges meeting down there, and he didn't show up for it. That's a work of fiction. And other parts of it show he's got a haircut, parent-teacher conference. Does that mean he's doing his job? No, it doesn't.
All right, thank you. Bill?
Mr. Jambois, you said you had no plans to run for Dane County District Attorney when you were hired last year, but it was a job you had sought appointment to back in 2010 and weren't selected. Aren't you framing the office as a disaster in part to help secure a job that you've wanted all along?
I didn't want the job. And the job that I had now, the job of being a major felony crimes prosecutor, in my estimation, is the dream job. I love that job. I wasn't going to run for this office. And if I had planned to run for this office, I would have started making plans for it and laying the groundwork for it months ago. The reason that I finally decided to run for district attorney is because of the abusive bullying tactics of Ishmael Ozanne. When we had a an attorney staff meeting that he said was a mandatory meeting, all of the attorneys had to be there, and he sat there and he insulted and demeaned the attorneys in that office for the better part of 20 to 25 minutes without providing one single example of one single thing that one single attorney did wrong. And at that point, I raised my hand. I said, "What are you talking about?" And he made references to racist file notes or something like that. I said, "Give us an example of what racist file note you're talking about." And they said, "No, well, they'll take that up with an individual attorney." Well, why don't you take it up with the individual attorney? Why did you insult and demean and offend everybody in the office? There were other issues in that office that demonstrated a kind of an indifference to what prosecutors do, to the kinds of struggles that we have every day in court, to the kind of struggles that we have trying to put our cases together, to the absence of mentorship in that office. So no, I didn't come in there with the idea of running for district attorney. I was only planning to work for another year, a year and a half maybe. I was going to then retire. I wanted to help this office. I could see the pressing need for assistance from a senior felony major crimes prosecutor, somebody who's got a lot of trial experience like I do, and God knows they need that kind of help. But I had no intention, and I could do that as a major felony crimes prosecutor. I love the job that I have. What I can't tolerate is the abuse and neglect that comes from an absentee landlord, from a district attorney who doesn't show up, doesn't stand up for victims. That's why I ran.
D.A. Ozanne, can you respond?
Well, there's a lot of accusations. And I've been in court, all right? We had the Critton case, and I was in trial for a total of 5 weeks. And Channel 27, who's here today, covered that gavel to gavel, all right? One thing I learned from that, I could not push the systemic change that is needed in this community and that this community wants. I could not do that if my case and my availability was dictated by the courts. So I chose, as I think other district attorneys have, because there is no district attorney that I know in my history in Dane County that has had a full caseload. There are things when you administer an office of about 100 people that has to happen. And if I am not there to do it, and if I am not in the community, on these boards, on these work groups, the voice of the district attorney's office is not heard, because I am the one who carries the authority of the office. So, thank you.
Allison?
Question for D.A. Ozanne. In June, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled in favor of allowing the use of risk assessment algorithms, like the COMPASS tool, in sentencing. And in March, Dane County began using a pretrial safety assessment with the goal of reducing jail populations, eliminating racial disparity in incarceration, and providing and improving public safety. What is your opinion of these models and their role in the criminal justice system?
Well, what I've said is this. I'm not against risk assessment tools, but risk assessment tools do skew, because they're static factors, skew persons of color or populations that are at risk of already being disproportionately impacted higher. And until that happens, and until someone can show me a tool that doesn't do that, we're going to have issues. So we have to be very cautious in their use. And I think there's a number of articles that have come out just recently showing just that. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't use them. But in order to actually have a risk assessment tool that is fair and just, the community itself needs to be fair and just. And so you need to level the playing field as well. So I'm not against them. And frankly, what I thought is historically in Dane County, we have deferred to signature bond. That's what the court commissioners and the judges have done. Now, if you use a risk assessment tool, it may mean that more people are actually going to be spending more time in jail. And I've said we need to be very aware of that as well. So I'm for addressing racial disparities. I'm for doing whatever we can. I am not for doing it on the backs of victims and without victims' voices being heard. When I'm at these meetings, I hear a lot of people saying we need to do better about racial disparities. We need to cut down on pre-incarceration, pre-charge incarceration. I agree, but we have to do it in a way that's safe and effective. And we can't not value the victim's voice. We cannot not value victims' involvement in the process. And that's the beauty of the Restorative Justice Court. All right? It empowers victims. It allows them and their voice to be heard. It allows them to have more of a say in the outcome and the repair of the harm, which is what I believe the community wants. And I think that model actually builds empathy in our youthful offenders, allowing us to have a much better impact on recidivism.
Thank you.
Mr. Jambois?
Well, first of all, I don't even know what he was trying to actually say about these static tools. This program that you're talking about is going to be a test program here in Dane County, where half the people that are pretrial incarcerated are going to be subject to or all of them are going to be subject to this COMPASS standard, but only half of them are going to be communicated to the commissioners, and they're going to see how that influences the bond, and then they're going to look at it 2 or 3 years later to see how we did it. And I certainly favor these kinds of programs to evaluate what's going on. But Ish had an opportunity to reduce pretrial incarceration for African Americans, predominantly African Americans, and he chose not to participate in the program. And in fact, he ignored the program. That's that March 23rd meeting that I was talking about that he didn't even go to. He missed the agenda. And then when they implemented the program, he tried to get it stopped. And it was only because of his utter indifference that he was not at all prepared to implement that program. So I think the DA is supposed to work with the judiciary to address these pretrial incarceration issues. And Ish hasn't done that.
Thank you. A question for you, Mr. Jambois. Earlier this summer, DA Ozanne made an exception to the norm when he conditionally declined to press charges against Janelle Laird, an 18-year-old black woman arrested after a disturbance at Easttown Mall, and instead referred her to a Dane County Community Restorative Court. How would you have handled that case?
I won't criticize Ish's handling of a specific individual cases, and I'll tell you why that is. As a prosecutor, I know how difficult it is to evaluate each one of these cases. We look at all of the reports. I'm sure that he went through that video many, many times. I've only seen it one time when my daughter showed it to me, and only saw a small portion of it. I've never seen any of the police reports. I never interviewed any of the officers that were involved. So it would be inappropriate for me to evaluate that case, or the other people have raised the Tony Robinson case. I don't want to go after Mr. Ozanne on specific charging decisions that he made or referrals that he made, because it's unfair to the system. And it's also inappropriate for prosecutors to comment on cases that are pending in court. And that case is still pending. She's in the Restorative Justice Program. But I will say this, I strongly support Restorative Justice Court as an option. But let's put this in context. There were like 12 or 13,000 referrals to the Dane County DA's office last year. The Restorative Justice Court handled 70 cases. So let's put this in context. We're talking about less than 0.5% of all the cases that we get go to Restorative Justice Program. And by the way, you can't look at the Restorative Justice Program as a means by which to reduce racial disparity, because whether somebody gets into the Restorative Justice Program can't have anything to do with the color of their skin. We can't make charging decisions based on the color of somebody's skin. That's illegal, and it's un-American, and it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And I've sworn an oath to uphold that Constitution, and so has Mr. Ozanne. So we can't make charging decisions based upon or to try to offset implicit bias. The way to address racial disparities is to protect the children who are at risk in our community. My wife and I became foster parents in Kenosha, and we advocated for more foster parents. We talked constantly about the need for foster parents, and Bev and I foster parented 25 children in our home, and the vast majority of those were African American children. That's how you reduce racial disparities, is by protecting and nurturing and caring for the children who are at risk in our community and supporting them in school. Thank you.
And your response?
Where to start? The Community Restorative Court is a pilot program right now. Ideally, it will serve the whole county. Ideally, it will cover the whole county. Now it's only in the South District. If you think about the possibilities for the Community Restorative Court, 17 to 25-year-olds, low-level youthful offenders, countywide, not whether they're black or white, Asian, Hispanic, youthful offenders, allowed to repair the harm, accept responsibility, and move on with their lives without entering their name on the court's database so everyone can see it, so that they then are marred for the rest of their life as someone with a conviction, able to be productive members of the community. anything we do to better this situation here will have an impact on racial disparities, precisely because we are the worst in the nation. And that's what I'm addressing right now.
Thank you.
So, Ozanne, as someone who took an extremely close look at the events that led to the death of Tony Robinson, can you identify anything that the police could or should have done differently, or suggest any changes to police training or protocols that might reduce the chance of this happening again?
Well, what I can say about that decision is I believe I was very thorough. I believe I went through the facts very clearly, and I made my decision. So I think that stands. Now, when I was talking to law enforcement and actually going all across the state running for Attorney General, law enforcement was saying to me that they wanted more training on de-escalation. That's one way to do it. Okay, that's one thing we possibly can do. But we need to have a broader discussion within the community regarding use of force. And one benefit of the Community Restorative Court is just that. It will build the relationship between law enforcement and the community. It will allow not just the parties to be affected and transformed. It can allow this community to have that hard but necessary discussion and really transform this community and get us to a better place with a stronger relationship between law enforcement and the community. That's the big benefit for Community Restorative Court. Now, I think if you want to really have an impact on community safety, and where we're seeing law enforcement officers come into contact with officer-involved shootings, we need to do something different about mental health in the community. We need to figure out how to better wrap around services so that we don't have law enforcement coming into contact with individuals in a mental health crisis. I think we can do that. I think we need to do that. And hopefully, with what we're doing in our office, Galen Strebe, a retired attorney who used to do most of the Chapter 51s for the county, has now come back into our office to help us identify mental health issues and connect people to treatment and counseling as soon as possible. So if we could take somebody out of the criminal justice system and connect them to treatment and counseling, we should. But that's what we're doing. We're trying to make it so that we don't have to pull someone all the way into the system to get the job done.
Mr. Jambois, your response?
Well, as I've previously indicated, I'm not going to second-guess individual charging decisions that Ishmael Ozanne has made, because I know as a prosecutor how difficult that can be, and I know especially how difficult it is to deal with officer-involved shootings, which is something I unfortunately had to do many times in Kenosha as well. And I take no doubt that Ishmael Ozanne very carefully evaluated all the circumstances surrounding the death of Tony Robinson. I don't think, however, that particular case had anything to do with mental health issues. There was another shooting that same night where a young man shot at 5 or 6 or 7 police officers, and he clearly had mental health issues. Tony Robinson was messed up on psychedelic mushrooms and was uncontrollably violent. And so it was a great tragedy. It's a terrible thing when something like that happens. I don't know what we can do about a continuum on the use of force. This officer had to respond to something. He had this call about a very violent person, and he heard some sounds inside the apartment like it was very, very violent. If he waited for backup, somebody might have been beaten or killed inside that apartment. So sometimes officers have to move. They don't have any choice.
Okay. A question for you, Mr. Jambois. We get that you don't think the office is run well. Give us an example of some things that you would do differently if you were in charge of running and managing the office.
Oh, my goodness, there are so many things. But first of all, I'd start out with a team concept. I'd assign a team of attorneys to a specific branch of court, and then I'd assign a team of paralegals and secretaries to work with that and victim witness, working together as a team to serve the needs of that particular branch of court. And I'd also even have a different way of numbering cases. Right now, a case comes into the office and we number individual files. But we're not prosecuting files, we're prosecuting people. And we need to take into consideration how many times that person's been in the office. And you can't tell by looking at with this filing system we have right now. It's like every case is treated like it's a brand new case, like we've never seen that person before. If we numbered people instead of numbering the files, when the person comes in the first time, they get a number. Second time, it's that number plus the letter A. Third time, that number plus the letter B. In Kenosha, we could pick up a file. We knew instantaneously how many times that person had been in the office before, and we could take care of that. And what are the practical implications of that? You know, the State Journal just did a story a few weeks ago about the homeless situation in this community. That there's what, 2,500 to 2,500 homeless people in this community? But you know that 90% of the problems, 90% of police calls involve 34 individuals. 34. Don't you think we'd have a system? If we had the numbering system like that, we'd know exactly who those 34 people are. We'd be able to provide services to those 34 people. And if they don't want to respond to the services, well, then we'd lock them up, because you know what? They're preying upon the homeless in our community, and they're detracting from the quality of life in our community. And that's why if you have a numbering system, and if you have this kind of a team operative system, then you're dealing with these people that are the major problems in the community, and you will, at that point, become a transformational force for good in your community. You're going to improve the quality of life for all of the citizens, the business owners who work downtown and put all of their lives, all of their money into their small store, and they got a couple of homeless vagrants peeing outside and fighting with each other. You know, we can shut that down. And why is the greatest community, I think, in the nation suffering like that? We can take care of that.
Okay. Ozanne?
Well, you know, the numbering system. We're actually moving in our office to become a paperless office, and we actually will be likely by the end of this year. Some of the delay, I'll just tell you, is attorneys. The rest of the office is already paperless. So we're moving forward. The numbering system that Mr. Jambois brings up may have worked in Kenosha more than 10 years ago. It won't work here with the state's Protect RMS system, all right? That just won't happen. And you know what? When you type in the defendant's name, all of their cases come up. They're right there for you to see. If you want to click on them, you can pull them up, pull up the reports, you can figure out what happened. Now, you know, it may be that a very few number of the homeless are causing a lot of the problems. But I think the way to deal with homelessness is to treat people with dignity and respect and get them connected to services. Because when we do that, and if there are mental health issues and you get them stable in the community, they're no longer causing problems. But frankly, just to lock someone up because they're homeless, I don't think that's the right answer.
Ozanne, in 2012, you pledged that in 2 to 5 years, people will no longer be able to say that racial disparities in Dane County are the worst in the nation. But data released in 2015 from the Mayor's Office and the Race to Equity report show that the gap could be widening. What is your assessment of the progress that's been made on this issue?
Well, you know, 2 years ago, we didn't have the Community Restorative Court. 2 years ago, we were probably just in the middle of talking about positive parenting, about our no-hit zone, which has been in existence for now 22 months. You know, these are things that are real. This isn't pie-in-the-sky programs that I'm talking about making, but they are now finally in existence. They are now finally gaining momentum, and we're getting national recognition and notice. You know, when you talk about no-hit zones, I believe the UW Hospital is going to be coming on this year. Gunderson Lutheran is already no-hit for all of their hospitals and clinics. You know, these are things that we're talking about that are going to get in front of violence, that are going to get in front of issues we have with making sure that the educational achievement gap doesn't widen and actually shrinks, because we know what, we're going to actually hopefully have kids who are prepared and engaged in school. We're going to make sure that parents have all the information about early brain development so they can make the most informed decision on how to raise their kids. We're going to talk about positive parenting. And when we talk about protecting kids, our Child Abuse Initiative addresses that right up front and does so in a way that we are not taking parents and making them felons, because once we pull them into the system, we know that we have just increased their child's likelihood of coming into the system by 60%, and that is not appropriate. So these things take time, but I'll tell you right now, the changes we've made in 6 years are more than you've seen in the last 20 in this community, and will be getting national notice, and will start having great impact across the board. That is what we'll have, as long as I'm here to continue to push us into the future. I'm not going to take us backwards. I'm not going to look to prosecute more and have supposedly higher conviction rates. Frankly, only 2% of cases go to trial. So if you want to look at the conviction rate, our conviction rates are off the chart. But you know what? What was happening in 2005? That was the heart of mass incarceration. And I think we've realized spending more on incarceration than education is not the right direction.
Your response?
Well, in Kenosha County, the heart and soul of our office was directed at protecting the children who are at risk in our community, and that's what really reduces racial disparities. That's what really provides protection to children, and that's what allows them the opportunity to succeed. And Ish's notion of this no-hit zone, you know, a bumper sticker slogan like that is a very poor substitute to actually digging down into the system and seeing where the problems are. One of the things that I instituted in Kenosha County was an institutional review committee. Every month we looked at every single child who was placed out of the home, every single month, and we determined whether that child had to be out of the home. You know, the first year that we instituted that, we reduced our out-of-home placements by 70%. We provided in-home services to those children. We put them back with their families again. We turned those lives around, and adopting children and putting them in adoptive homes protects children and transforms them into great citizens. We know this because we've done it, and we can do it here in Dane County as well. We don't even do CHIPS cases in the Dane County DA's office. You know, it's done by the Corporation Counsel's office. What a terrible idea. We should be protecting children in this community, and we're not.
Thanks. And a question for you, Mr. Jambois. It's been said that the country is in the grips of a heroin epidemic, and certainly Dane County is no stranger to that problem. What more can we do to combat opiate addiction and heroin use here? Oh
my God, it is such a terrible epidemic, and it is so much worse than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And you know, part of it is people need to be very concerned. When you're prescribed opiate-based medication, you should be terrified of that, because 60 to 70% of the people that are addicted to heroin today, they're not recreational drug users. They didn't start out as recreational drug users. They were injured, or they had a back problem, and they were prescribed an opiate medication. And then they became addicted to it. And then the doctor had cut them off the medication, and they couldn't afford to buy it on the black market anymore. So heroin was the cheaper alternative for them. And people are dying from heroin overdoses regularly. I think one of the things that we need to do is explore a law enforcement assisted diversion program, so that when we call them PNBs, we got a name for them, pulseless non-breathers. When the law enforcement gets called to a scene like that and they revive them with Narcan, these people are really right at the ready to be diverted out of the criminal justice system at that point and provide them with treatment. Now, we do have a diversion program in Dane County, but it isn't anywhere near adequate enough. And you know, whoever the district attorney is, we need more treatment services for people that are addicted to drugs. And I want the viewers and the listeners to know this. It used to be that people thought that drug users were just, you know, bottom-dwelling people, that they were just gangbangers and people that didn't care about the normal mores of life. That's no longer the case. The people that are, many of these people that are addicted to heroin are our cousins, our neighbors, our nephews, our nieces, and they were injured at one point, and now they're addicted to heroin, and we need to do everything we can to step up and help them, and that starts with a treatment program in the community, and we should have a diversion program directly from law enforcement right into the treatment community. Thank you.
And your response?
Well, addressing heroin, we have reorganized Dane County's drug court, which is the longest standing state drug court in history. This is its 20th year. We reorganized it and increased its capacity. That's still not enough to address the heroin epidemic. We created in our diversion unit a heroin-specific track to also increase capacity of what we are facing in this community. That said, the capacity still isn't enough. We're asking that position in our office be made whole, and we compete for a grant to expand it. But I'll tell you, you actually have to give this administration at the state level some credit now, because one of the biggest hits to this heroin epidemic is recommending to doctors to prescribe half of the prescriptions they normally do, as well as less than half for their automatic refill. That alone, if doctors would go along with, it would take half the doses off the street. It would make us a safer community.
All right. Do we have any questions from Facebook viewers?
Very technical.
All right. This is a question for Mr. Jambois. Didn't you get hired by DA Ozanne? Did you discuss your problems with the DA before running against him?
Yes, I was hired by Ishmael Ozanne, and I want you to know it was difficult for me to make the decision to run against him because I'm grateful for him hiring me. And yes, I did talk to him about the problems in this office. I talked to him about the problems in the office like 2 months before. 2 months after I got hired, and he completely ignored it. Did I talk to him before I decided to run? No, he talked to me before. He talked to all the attorneys in our office before I decided to run. And I was so profoundly offended and insulted and disgusted by the way that he was treating the prosecutors in this office. I went home that night and I told my wife I'm going to run for district attorney. And of course she said okay, and she started putting the paperwork together. That was a week, by the way, before the nomination papers were due, which I think further evidences the fact that I didn't come in there with the idea that I was going to run. And it was an uncomfortable and difficult decision for me to make. So I'm not running because I want to be district attorney. I'm running because I want Dane County to have a district attorney who actually leads the office, and Ishmael Ozanne is not doing it. He thinks he's doing the job because he's got the title. He's got the title 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. Well, yeah, he's got the title, but that doesn't mean he's earning the paycheck. You earn the paycheck by actually doing the work, by digging down into the system, by prosecuting cases, by mentoring the attorneys in your office, and sure, by looking for ways to develop a restorative justice program, for looking for ways to improve upon our first offender program, which was in existence long before he got there, but also by standing up and showing leadership in areas like a veterans court, in which he opposed. He repeatedly opposed the veterans court. I would strongly support the creation of a veterans court, and I'm also going to handle cases. I'm going to litigate cases in the Dane County court system. That will give me further insights into the problems that are taking place there.
Okay, so this has come up a couple times now, the reference to the May meeting. D.A. Ozanne, could you explain what happened at that meeting?
Yes. At that meeting, what I said to my staff was, I'm very proud of what we've done. I'm very proud of what we are doing. But frankly, there are some things that are happening that I can no longer defend. That's what I said. Now, we were addressing some notes in a file that we had our attention brought to and raised questions as to whether or not there was, frankly, racial bias being placed in the file. Right before that meeting, I also became aware of a statement by a person in our office who basically said, do you think if I come to work in blackface, I won't be required to go to the implicit bias training? Implicit bias training that I am requiring the whole office to go to. And that training was put on by the courts in April. And the majority of our office actually was able to attend. I believe this community expects me to address those things immediately. And I'm not going to say that there aren't times when I have difficult conversations that make people uneasy. But if addressing these issues demoralizes my opponent, so be it. This community wants me to address racial disparities. They want me to address implicit bias and explicit racism, and that's what I have pledged to do.
Well, do I respond to
Yeah,
that? I
go
mean,
ahead.
that's utterly ridiculous proposition that I don't think he should respond to implicit bias. But what an ineffectual way to do it. You know, when I talk about implicit bias, we called it racial prejudice during most of my adult life. When I talk about racial prejudice, and I talk to law enforcement officers, and I talk to prosecutors, and I talk to citizens about it, I tell them how I know when they look at my daughter, they might see something that I don't see because my daughter is African American. You know, when I go out with my daughter, I see the way that some people look at my daughter. They don't look at her the way I see her. And that's what racial bias and racial prejudice is all about. So I make it very personal when I talk to members of my staff about that. I don't stand up and insult them and demean them and expect that now suddenly their eyes are opened. What a counterproductive thing to do. And there was no evidence of racial prejudice or racial bias that I've seen in that office. And if there is a racist in the office, then what you do is you get rid of the racist. You don't insult everybody else that's sitting next to him.
What evidence do you have? I mean, give us an example. What was in this file that made you address the entire staff with your concern?
By the way, I asked him to do that too, and he didn't do it.
Well, he's got a chance now.
Well, listen, there were notes in the file. We originally had our attention called to the file because of the disposition. We looked in there in the notes, and we saw what, frankly, I would put as slang. There wasn't quotes around it, so it wasn't clear if it was specifically what someone said, and there was no reason behind that information being portrayed in a file in that manner. And frankly, I couldn't defend that. So we addressed it. And I believe that this community is expecting me to address these issues with my staff. And frankly, change is hard. Change is hard. And addressing these issues makes people uncomfortable. I understand that, and that's not my intention. That never is. But I'm not going to shy away from necessary but difficult conversations that this community needs to have. And that's what I've been doing in the community. That's what I've been doing in the office. And we are moving forward. And we are better for it. And I don't look to get rid of my attorneys. I look to work with my attorneys and strengthen them. I look to work with people in the community and strengthen families. I look to hopefully change behavior of parents so they can work with positive parenting. Why? Because if we protect that child at that point from that incident, we protect them from that point all the way into the future and any other child that comes into that home. So you know what? We aren't having to take kids out of homes. We're strengthening the families, we're strengthening the community, and we're keeping ourselves safer because of it.
So he didn't answer that question, did he? I mean, you still don't know what the file notes are, and,
Well,
and
I
it's
know
that
more
kind of.
than I did before.
But it's that
I
kind
mean,
of.
it sounded reasonable that he had a concern about slang that was put in the file, and he raised the concern in a group setting.
No, he didn't. He didn't tell us what was in the file note. We still don't know. Even now, we don't know what it was in there. And you know, that we do expect that our district attorney is supposed to address problems in the office, but you're supposed to do it in a way that's coherent so that the people that are receiving the information know what the heck it is that he's talking about. And we still don't know what he's talking about. To this day, I don't know what he's talking about. And I don't expect him to stand up in front of the office and point to one particular prosecutor and say, you did this. But you know what I do expect him to do is sit down with that prosecutor and say, what is this about? And why did he do that instead of insulting all the attorneys in the office about one reference in one file on one case?
Well, DA, Ozanne,
Well,
did you have a
here's
private
here's
conversation with
where it
that
is.
prosecutor?
Here's where it is. We've worked with that prosecutor. We've counseled that prosecutor. And I believe that prosecutor is going to be a very good prosecutor going forward. Now, I think it's very clear, not just to Mr. Jambois, but everyone in the community now, what I was addressing in the file. I believe it's clear. If he wants to sort of say that it isn't, well, you know, we had slang in the file. That's what it was. It's undefensible, and I'm not sure why it was there. That is not how you have to convey information in a file. And so that is what I've asked our staff to deal with. And we've spoken to that specific person. And we've moved on, and we are better for it. Now, if Mr. Jambois still claims to not understand what's appropriate to be put in a file or not, well, then I guess I'm going to have to counsel him as well. But we can do that later.
Oh, all right. One other, and I think we might have time for one more, then we need to move to the lightning round and then closing remarks. All right. This is for Mr. Jambois. You were a DA in Kenosha when Michael Bell was killed by police. His death led to a change in state law requiring independent investigation of officer-involved shootings. Why didn't you prosecute officers in that case?
The Michael Bell family's own investigation revealed that that it was a justifiable homicide. I mean, you know, Michael Bell was shot and killed by a police officer. Another officer thought that Michael Bell was trying to take his gun. The officer that fired the weapon that killed Michael Bell asked him just before that he fired the shot, has he got your gun? Has he got your gun? And he said, yes, he's got my gun. He's got my gun. And at that point, they shot Michael Bell because they thought he was going to kill this other officer. And these are difficult calls to make. And I went through that. I spent several weeks going through several hundred hours going through that Michael Bell file. And it was a justifiable homicide. It was. And then the family conducted their own investigation, and they concluded that instead of him actually having the gun, the Officer Strasburg's gun might have been caught up on an outside mirror on the car. But nonetheless, that would have still caused Officer Strasburg to think that he had the gun and to think that his life was in immediate danger and caused him to tell the other officer that. And by the way, my investigation revealed that Michael Bell's mother and sister, who were there at the time, corroborated what the officers had said about this. But you know, that case is also just shows the terrible tragedy of these kinds of cases. Because you know, that officer, one of the officers involved, the Officer Strasburg, He committed suicide with a service weapon 4 years later. Do you think that that had something to do with that? Of course it did. These officer-involved shootings are very, very hard on law enforcement. It's true the Michael Bell family suffered terribly, and I had great sympathy for the loss that they sustained. It's a terrible thing when a young man gets killed. Michael Bell's loss is a terrible loss. Tony Robinson's loss is a terrible loss for the community. We regret that. It's also a terrible, terrible thing for the law enforcement officers, and we need to look for ways that we can reduce those incidents. And by the way, Michael Bell was fighting with cops. He was fighting with 5 cops, and he fought with cops all the time. One thing that the Bell family leaves out is that Michael Bell fought with law enforcement officers every time he encountered somebody in a uniform, every single time.
Thank you. DA Ozanne?
Well, I can't speak to the Bell case, but when you talk about officer-involved shootings and the litigation or the legislation that actually came into effect, Dane County had a model policy before the legislation took effect. I was able to get all 27 agencies around the table to stay at the table and agree not to investigate themselves prior to that statute changing. That doesn't happen if you don't build relationships with law enforcement and within the community. Now, I go to the chiefs' meetings, and I think Chief Falk out of Middleton, who is their president now, basically said, listen, he's the only one that's been doing it. My predecessors didn't. I can't be at those meetings if the court dictates my calendar. That is a change in this community that my predecessors would have loved to be able to claim credit for, but they can't. I was able to get that done because of my relationship with law enforcement and the fact that I actually go to their meetings consistently.
All right, and a final question. This one is for DA Ozanne. Why don't you attend drug court meetings?
Drug court meetings. Well, I guess I don't understand the question because I do attend drug court meetings, and for a long period of time, I was actually covering drug court Tuesday mornings. It doesn't show on my calendar, but I was actually covering drug court. Each of those cases are still assigned to the attorneys in the office, but I was covering because we didn't have anyone else to cover. I'm not sure of any other district attorney who goes in and covers the actual drug court case reviews, but I was doing it. Now, we have Ken Farmer, who is a retired ADA, who has actually now come back and volunteering. You know, Barb Franks is actually here today. She's a retired ADA, and she has actually come back into our office and is volunteering. Judy Muneker is a retired ADA, who is also right now back in our office volunteering in our crisis response program. Now, if you want to talk about dysfunction, you want to talk about low morale, people who retire don't come back to work for free somewhere where it's dysfunction and demoralizing. That doesn't happen. They're back because they believe in what we're doing, they see the change that is happening, and they are energized. They could be out enjoying themselves, feet up with a cool drink in the shade, but they're back working hard because they believe in what we're doing.
Mr. Jambois?
Well, my understanding is that he doesn't go to the pre-planning meetings before the drug court. I mean, I don't know who asked that question. I don't know what they're basing that on. Ish doesn't like to go to court, and you know he indicated, well, we can't do the veterans court. And by the way, veterans also have a lot of drug problems, and we've got wraparound services right here in Dane County with the Veterans Administration. So why would we not want to have a veterans court here in Dane County? And yet, when Judge Flanagan wanted to start a veterans court, Ishmael Ozanne was opposed to it. He said, "Oh, we don't have the resources." And then once we did start it, he pulled the plug on it. He said, "Well, we're not making any more referrals because the judges changed their case assignment methodology." I think that the district attorney needs to go to veterans court. I think we need to support the veterans court. They stood up for us. We should stand up for them.
And I have gone to Veterans Court. I've actually covered Veterans Court as well. The issue that I had with Veterans Court was not whether we should have one or not, because we have a VA right here. I always said, and I went down to Rock County to their Veterans Court, and I talked to David O'Leary, their district attorney, and I said we should be having the Veterans Court in Dane County versus trying to send our people to you in Rock, because the VA is right there. That's where I was. Now, we're at 1985 staffing levels in a community that's grown more than almost 50%. Law enforcement is higher than 50%. And what I have said is, listen, if you want to add specialty courts and you want to do more, it is harder and harder for us to support it. Not that we won't and not that we didn't, But we have to come to an agreement as to how people are referred and how they get in. Because if they don't have some consistency, which is what you found in Rock County with David O'Leary's drug veterans court, is the same thing. We need to have an agreement so that we can make sure that it's successful. I am trying to make sure that these programs that we've put into place succeed, because the importance to this community, to our veterans, to our persons of color, to everyone here, is that these innovative reforms that we are doing succeed. And frankly, if he was so in support of drug court and diversions, why was it that Kenosha didn't have a drug court until 2009? He was district attorney for what, 17 years? We've had drug court here in Dane County since 1996.
We had a Kenosha Treatment Alternatives program within a matter of months after I took office as Kenosha County District Attorney in 1989, so I don't know where he's getting those statistics from. But here's, in response to what he just said, this is a letter to Judge Flanagan from an attorney by the name of Stephen House. I just learned this morning that the District Attorney's Office is no longer making referrals to the Veterans Court program as a result of the return to the random judicial assignments in the local court system. This is dated December 22nd, 2014. Those were what he said. That's what his words, not mine. And then this is what Judge Flanagan said on January 8th, 2015. Colleagues, the district attorney has told me this afternoon that his office will not approve any additional participants coming into the vets court. We now have 5, until his office finds more resources. Now, so you see, I guess Veterans Court for him is a low priority. But by the way, when you're saying he had no resources, this is a guy who never goes to court. Why couldn't he go to Veterans Court? Then we'd have the resources. The Veterans Court, the thing that we need to do is it's every other Friday at noon. Why couldn't he do that? So this whole notion about lack of resources, yeah, we're stressed. It's difficult. It would help a whole lot if the district attorney would actually go to court. That would reduce our resource scarcity, wouldn't it?
Well, we've never stopped Veterans Court. And so for him to imply that, when the courts took away the intake system that we actually had asked that they put into place, that we actually operated more efficiently under, and they decided to change it and go back to a random draw. At that point in time, we had to figure out whether we could cover the courts and cover our constitutional obligations. Veterans Court, Drug Court, OWI Court, these alternatives are not constitutionally mandated. So if there is something that actually has to be cut in my office, it's likely going to have to be diversions. Now remember, we're still at 1985 staffing levels, and I am doing more with less and have done more with less every year. We actually have less attorneys in the office now than I had when I started in 2010. Yet we have not pulled back on services. We've actually increased. We've increased our drug court appearances. We've increased the capacity that we've had to deal with opiates. We've increased with community restorative court. Everything else that we've done and I've put in place is an increase.
All right, so we're at a juncture. What do you think about
Let's
lightning?
try this lightning round.
All right,
See
we're gonna
how
have
it
a
goes.
quick lightning round. Why don't we go
You
this way?
start with-
Oh.
You start?
Oh, okay. What, in a single word, is the most important qualification for someone seeking to be Dane County DA? Single word.
Me first, or who goes first?
Why don't you go first, Bob?
Leadership.
Truth.
Do you think that Wisconsin Attorney General Brad Schimmel is too partisan, yes or no?
Yes.
I wouldn't disagree.
Does Dane County lock up too many people? Yes or no?
We address crime, so I couldn't say that we lock up too many people. I understand that there's a disproportionate impact on certain groups, but remember this, even with a disproportionate number of persons of color in the system, you also got to understand the majority of their victims are also persons of color.
I think we're locking up people that should be locked up, and we're not locking up people that should be locked up. And again, that's a manifestation of the lack of leadership and our inability to single out the people that need the treatment of the criminal justice system versus those who just got caught up when they were very young and made a foolish mistake. I believe the criminal justice system is a very heavy hammer that should only be used in certain instances, and in some instances, we need to find a restorative justice program or a first offender program where we can divert them out of the system. You charge somebody with a criminal offense these days, and it's like tattooing the word felon across their forehead. if they ever apply for a job, if they ever even apply for an apartment, if they even ask a woman out on a date, they're probably going to get C-capped. And so it's very, very important to be careful about who we charge.
All right, we're going to try to get back to the lightning round.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes or
Am I
no?
going too fast? Yes,
Okay.
yes or no?
Too much.
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
Okay.
Okay, here's the next one. Does Dane County need a new jail? Yes or no?
No.
Yes, Dane County needs a humane facility, a facility that actually allows the sheriff to deal with mental health issues that are going to arise in the jail. The facilities that we have, the 3 that are cobbled together, are outdated, they're unsafe, and they don't have the structure to enable the sheriff to actually have any counseling or have any programs. Because back then, when these things were built, that wasn't on our agenda. Mental health issues were dealt with in the community and other places, and they've made their slow walk into the criminal justice system. And if we are going to have a humane community, we need a humane structure for the sheriff to run.
I thought it was yes or no.
Okay, we're trying. We're trying. Next one, Bill.
$272 million
Practice makes
for new jail.
Yes.
Name a local defense attorney who you admire.
I admire a whole lot, but Justin Nicholson, Nick Gansner, Nate Otis, there's a wide variety of them that I admire.
Great.
Yeah, Nick Gansner worked in our office. Nate Otis did as well. I guess the 2 defense attorneys who I probably admire most are not practicing anymore. That would be John Tompos and Denny Burke.
I admire Denny Burke, too.
Great. A few more.
Did you watch Making a Murderer?
I did.
What'd you think?
He's guilty. And by the way, Mike Griesbach just came out with a book. I haven't read it yet. But my wife and I can't even talk about Making a Murder because she's convinced he's innocent.
What about
And,
Brendan Dassey? Is he guilty too?
I believe he is, yes. And I believe that story, that Making of a Murderer did not fairly depict what happened with the Brandon Dassey case, in the Stephen Avery case. And I encourage everybody to read Michael Griesbach's book, which I haven't read yet, but I'm going to read it. In fact, I'm going to buy it and get my wife to read it first, and then I'm going to read it.
When it came out, Isthmus ran an excerpt. It was a cover story
I did.
2 years back.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
What, the Mike Griesbach
Mike
book?
Griesbach.
Oh, it's just being published today, I thought, or August 1st.
No, there's an earlier version of it.
Oh.
It's coming out again.
DA Ozanne?
Making a Murder?
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
not watched it.
Oh, should marijuana be legalized for recreational use?
Yes.
We haven't criminally prosecuted small amounts of personal use in this community long before I became district attorney.
Okay, so I think you both deserve a medal that you get up every morning, you go to work with each other, and you have to cooperate while in the midst of this campaign. I'd like you to say something nice about each other. Identify something positive.
Well, I like Ozanne. I really, maybe can't tell it by the way things are going, but I actually do like Ishmael Ozanne. I just think that I tried to help Ishmael Ozanne. I voted for him when he ran for Attorney General. I voted for him the first time he ran for District Attorney. And I tried to help in this office. I tried to help him get this office organized. But he's not a good administrator. But he's
Okay,
you've
stay
won
with-
just
wait,
nice.
stay
Just
with
nice.
positive.
Only
Just
nice.
nice. Just
Only
nice.
nice.
He's a nice person, and he's a loving father, a loving husband. He's a good man.
DA
Bob's a
Ozanne?
hard worker.
All right.
Well said.
Yes, I believe we're on to closing remarks now. And that will be the DA goes first.
No, it's
Oh.
the opposite.
No, they said that you would go first.
No,
and
yeah,
go
you
last.
do go first.
Yeah, 'cause
You
Because
went.
Bob first and
Bob
Mr.
went
Jim
first for the first
for
time.
the
You go first the
opening
second time,
remarks.
and he
Okay.
also gets to go last, which how the presidential debates do it.
Sounds good. How long do I have?
3. Oh.
3 minutes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes? All right. Well, right now, I'm going to start reading off my endorsements because I think it's important that you show who is also standing with you and believes in you. U.S. Congressman Mark Pocan, former Governor Jim Doyle, who actually had the opportunity to appoint my opponent to this very position, but chose me. Madison Mayor Paul Soglin, County Executive Joe Parisi, Wisconsin Senator Fred Risser, Senator Mark Miller, Representative Melissa Sargent, Representative Sandy Pope, Representative Rob Call, Representative Latanya Johnson out of Milwaukee, Dane County Sheriff Dave Mahoney, Milwaukee County District Attorney John Chisholm, and former Dane County Sheriff Rick Ramish. I could go on for the people, but now I'm also talking about labor. Labor, Madison Teachers, Inc., AFSCME, Council 32, SEIU, Wisconsin State Council, Firefighters Local 311, IUEO Local 139, Building and Trades Council, Carpenters Union, Local 314. So, you know, these show the people in the community who believe in what we are doing, who believe in what my leadership has brought this community. So if someone wants to talk about my dysfunction, you know, listen, I don't have time to stand in the hall and talk about every single case that happens every day. But we put on trainings, all right? Tons of trainings that Bob Jambois has actually attended. And some have said is the best training he's ever had in his history, as well as national level speakers. I won't be able to go through all of those in the time I have left. When you want to talk about, you know, demoralization or dysfunction, listen, in 2010, in July, corrections had 88 openings for correctional officers and sergeants. I was leading the day-to-day operations of the Department of Corrections. Now, they had 403 openings. That is due to Act 10 and this administration's hollowing out of the state workforce. That is what's happening, and I've addressed that. When you want to talk about people who have left, they've retired, they've moved on to other jobs where, you know what, they actually get more pay and do less work. They actually have a better ability to do what they love to do. And I can't compete with that because the state has only given me this year 2% to give to people to bump. So in order for me to say that they're leaving because of me, Ed Trelevin did an article on that a year ago. An article specifically on that. Yes, I know. Specifically on that point. You've overrun to. He asked Shelley Rush that specific question. Did you leave because of Ozanne's leadership? That was the article's purpose. There was no mention. No mention of this dysfunction that she supposedly has now. She mentioned high caseload and an inability to collaborate with partners.
What did the
That
time
is
limits
it.
matter at all?
Thank
they do
you.
matter.
It's the closing
Thank you.
remarks,
Okay.
so we allowed a little extra.
Okay. You know, first of all, let's say this about endorsements. When I ran the first time for district attorney in Kenosha against the Kenosha County District Attorney, all these elected officials, all the unions came out and they endorsed the incumbent, which is what unions do. I was a member of United Auto Workers Local 72, and they endorsed the incumbent. But I still beat him, and I beat him because I had a better idea, I had a better plan. Now, in terms of the endorsements that I really care about, I care about the people who've worked with me, the people who know what I'm capable of doing. Here's an endorsement that really matters to me. The Kenosha County District Attorney-elect is Mike Gravely, and he wrote, I had the honor of serving as an assistant district attorney for 13 years under Bob Jambois. First and foremost, Bob was a leader. I was amazed at how he managed to care passionately for every victim, every defendant, and the community at large. I can't count the number of times I was inspired by his energy and integrity. I was lucky to have learned from Bob Jambois. Dane County is tremendously lucky he will be their next district attorney. That's from Mike Gravely, the Kenosha County District Attorney-elect. And this is what Shelley Rush had to say about me. Bob Jambois went back to work as a prosecutor in Dane County and took over my felony caseload when I left the office in 2015. He did that because he missed and loved the work and because he is a leader and an excellent prosecutor. He is running for district attorney because he cares about the safety and welfare of Dane County and sees firsthand the devastation that has become of the Dane County District Attorney's Office. He will restore leadership, competence, and accountability to this most important office in the criminal justice system. Those are the endorsements that I care about. People that have worked with me, people that know what I'm capable of doing. And you know what? My time is up, so I'm going to actually follow the rules. Thank you. I hope you get out and vote for me August 9th.
All right, yes, thanks everybody for tuning in and for being here. The election is August 9th. As Mr. Jambois said, please get out and vote. Thank you.